Story 1. The Silent Stalker. It was a chilly December evening, and the streets were bustling with the holiday spirit. Strings of twinkling lights illuminated every corner, and carolers sang faintly in the distance. I decided to take advantage of getting off work early and finish my Christmas shopping. My name's Evelyn, and I'm a 30-year-old woman. My husband was at home, so it seemed like the perfect chance to get him a surprise gift. I drove to a local shopping center that had a few strip malls clustered together. After spending about an hour picking out gifts, I headed back to my car. The parking lot was dimly lit, and the harsh wind whipped at my scarf as I made my way to my car. As I unlocked the door, a cold sensation of unease washed over me. I glanced up and noticed a man sitting in a car a few rows over, his eyes locked on me. His face was partially obscured by shadows, but his presence was unnerving. Brushing it off as paranoia, I got into my car and drove to the next stop, a nearby Target. I spent at least half an hour inside, browsing the aisles and grabbing items not just for gifts but for general household needs. When I returned to the parking lot, my heart skipped a beat. There he was again, the same man, parked a few cars away, his gaze as piercing as before. This couldn't be a coincidence. I hurriedly got into my car, locking the doors and starting the engine. My pulse was racing as I drove out of the lot, constantly checking my rearview mirror. He didn't follow me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching. I made one final stop at a grocery store to grab a few things for dinner. Despite my growing unease, I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. But as I approached my car in the lot, dread settled in the pit of my stomach. He was there again, his car now parked at an angle, partially hidden by other vehicles. I didn't hesitate this time. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and drove straight home. As I pulled into the driveway, relief flooded over me. I thought it was over, but as I unloaded the groceries, I caught sight of headlights through the window. A car slowed down and parked across the street. My stomach dropped. It was him. I called out to my husband, explaining what had happened. Without a word, he grabbed his baseball bat from the closet and stormed outside. As he approached the car, the man peeled out with a screech of tires, disappearing into the night. To this day, I don't know what his intentions were. Was he planning to follow me inside? Was he hoping I lived alone? I'm just grateful my husband was there that night, because I haven't seen the man since. Before the shadows creep closer, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because in the dark corners of the internet, your support might just keep the horror at bay, or summon more. Story 2. The Visitor on Christmas Eve. My family has always celebrated Christmas Eve with a big dinner. That year, we had a small gathering, just my parents, my younger sister, and me. After dinner, we sat in the living room exchanging stories, the fireplace crackling warmly as snow fell softly outside. Around 10 p.m., we heard a faint knock at the front door. My dad frowned. We weren't expecting anyone, especially on Christmas Eve. He got up to check, but when he opened the door, no one was there. He stepped out onto the porch looking around. Probably kids playing a prank, he said when he came back inside. But as soon as he sat down, the knock came again, louder this time. My sister and I exchanged uneasy glances as Dad opened the door again. Once more, the porch was empty, the snow undisturbed. "That's enough," Dad muttered, shutting the door firmly and locking it. Story 3. The Haunted Santa Suit. Last Christmas, my cousin Ethan dressed up as Santa for our family gathering to surprise the kids. He had borrowed an old Santa suit from a thrift store, complete with a worn-out hat and boots. The kids were thrilled, and the night went off without a hitch. The next morning, Ethan called me, his voice shaky. "I need to tell you something about that suit," he said. Confused, I asked what was wrong. "I was putting it away last night, and I noticed something inside the jacket." He continued, "It's going to sound crazy, but there was a message stitched into the lining. It said, 'He sees you when you're sleeping.'" I laughed nervously, assuming it was a joke, but Ethan swore it wasn't. "That's not the weird part," he added. "I kept hearing noises while I was wearing it, like whispers right in my ear, and when I looked in the mirror, I swear, the suit moved." "Moved?" I repeated, my stomach sinking. "The sleeve lifted, like it was waving," he said. But my arm wasn't moving. Ethan returned the suit to the thrift store the next day, unwilling to keep it in his house. He's not the superstitious type, but he refuses to talk about that suit now. The kids still remember the Santa who visited that night, but we'll never forget the unsettling story behind the costume. The mood was tense as we tried to continue our evening. But then we heard it, a slow, deliberate tapping on the window. It wasn't just the wind. It was too rhythmic, too purposeful. We all froze, staring at the curtains. No one dared to move. Finally, Dad grabbed a flashlight and pulled back the curtain. Nothing, but the unsettling feeling lingered. We stayed up late that night, the joy of Christmas replaced by unease. Whoever or whatever had knocked on our door and tapped on the window never came back, but the memory of that eerie Christmas Eve still gives me chills. Story 4. The Mysterious Messenger. 2 years ago, my wife, Elena, and I went Christmas shopping at the largest mall in the city. The mall was a sprawling maze of shops, packed with people scrambling to finish their holiday shopping. We had a long list to check off, so we spent hours darting from store to store, carrying bags stuffed with gifts. As the evening wore on, we decided to split up temporarily to shop for each other. It seemed like a good idea at the time. The mall was massive, and we figured it would be easy to avoid running into each other. I was browsing in a store when a woman I didn't recognize approached me. She was in her mid-30s, wearing a heavy coat and a knitted hat. She tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Your wife sent me. Her phone died, and she's waiting for you outside the north exit." The north exit? It didn't make sense. That part of the mall was practically abandoned. Just a quiet sidewalk and an empty field where a parking lot used to be. Suspicion prickled at the back of my neck. "Thank you," I said cautiously, but the woman turned and walked away before I could ask anything else. Something felt off, but I couldn't ignore the possibility that Elena needed me. As I headed for the exit, I tried calling her phone. No answer. I reached the north exit and pushed open the heavy doors. The cold air hit me like a slap. The area was eerily quiet, the only light coming from a distant street lamp. My breath fogged in the frigid air as I looked around. She wasn't there. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Elena was calling. "Where are you?" she asked. Her voice was steady but confused. "I'm near the food court." Relief and fear washed over me simultaneously. "Don't move," I said. "I'll meet you there." When we reunited, I told her about the strange woman. Elena swore she hadn't spoken to anyone. Who was the woman, and why had she tried to lure me to that desolate exit? To this day, I don't have answers. I shudder to think what might have happened if Elena hadn't called me when she did. Story 5. The Whispering Wrapping Paper. It was the night before Christmas, and I was in my living room wrapping gifts for my nieces and nephews. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater and the occasional rustling of wrapping paper. My husband was already in bed, leaving me to finish up. As I cut a sheet of paper, a soft whisper tickled my ear. Startled, I froze, the scissors trembling in my hand. The sound was faint, barely audible, but unmistakable, a voice murmuring words I couldn't understand. I glanced around the room. No one was there. The house was locked up tight, and the only light came from the Christmas tree twinkling in the corner. Telling myself it was just the wind, I resumed wrapping, though my hands shook slightly. A few minutes later, I heard it again, closer this time. A hushed, breathy voice, like someone leaning in right next to me. I shot up from the floor, heart pounding. "Who's there?" I called out. Silence. Gathering my courage, I searched the house, checking every room, every closet. Nothing. The eerie quiet of the house only made my anxiety worse. I returned to the living room, determined to finish quickly. But as I picked up another gift, the whisper returned. This time, the words were clearer. "Leave it." I dropped the box, my chest tightening with fear. Then I noticed something strange. The wrapping paper I had just set aside seemed to move on its own, crinkling and shifting as if an invisible hand was smoothing it out. That was it. I left the gifts as they were and bolted to the bedroom, waking my husband. He thought I was imagining things, but he agreed to check the house again with me. Of course, we found nothing. The next morning, I finished wrapping the gifts in daylight, refusing to touch the paper I had used the night before. I have no idea what caused those whispers or why they seemed to emanate from something as innocent as wrapping paper. All I know is that I'll never forget the chilling voice that told me to stop.